At Bluewater Photo, we're constantly on a quest for finding the best underwater camera housings on the market. Today we meet up with Andy Sallmon from CNC to discuss the CNC MDX Canon EOS R5 underwater housing for the Canon EOS R5 camera. This camera is still one of the best underwater cameras in the world for both photo and video, and we wanted to show you the corresponding CNC housing and why we think it's an excellent choice for Canon R5 shooters. Hey guys, this is Nirupam from the Underwater Photography Guide and Bluewater Photo. I'm here today with Andy Sallmon from CNC with the MDX R5 housing for the Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera. For those of you that don't know, the Canon R5 is still our favorite underwater camera of this year and last year. It's a really incredible camera that's capable of taking 45 megapixel photos, 8K video, 4K video up to 120 frames per second, and also has animal eye autofocus tracking and a lot of other cool features that I talk about in some of my reviews, so I'll put that down below and you can check that out. Now, we just went diving in sunny San Diego in not so great conditions, but had an awesome camera otherwise. So I thought we would just talk a little bit about our experience with the camera. We have the new Canon 100mm RF macro lens on here. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we thought of that as well. And obviously we're also going to talk about this housing. Let's start with the controls. So there are 3 dial controls on this housing that makes it really easy to control your triangle of exposure. So that's aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. But Andy, are there other controls or any other features in the controls that you think really make this housing stand out?
Yes, on the back, your autofocus point can be reset by what we like to call a joystick on the back. There's no actual stick on the back, but what we've got is a 4-way pad and then a center button. So the joystick on the back allows you to move the autofocus point up, down, right, left, wherever you need to put it for your critical composition. And one of the real cool things that we did is we put a center button in it, like the camera, and that center button on the camera allows you to, with one button push, move the autofocus point back to its original position in the center of the frame. So if you shoot one subject and you like your autofocus point to the right, but then this one needs to be to the left, you don't have to go boom, 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 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 times. You can just hit center and then off from there as you need to. So that's a really, really big feature, a big plus for controls in the camera. The other thing about the controls that you might have seen in the advertising, we take a lot of pictures of the housing in the dark, and all of our buttons, all of our levers are marked, not only marked with what they do, but they're luminescent, so they glow in the dark basically. And on a deep, dark dive like we have here sometimes in California, and Nirupam definitely has it up in Seattle, where it's overcast 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Or on a night dive, if you like to do blackwater dives, it's real simple. Just look at the back of the camera and see what button you need to press. And that may not be as important once you've had the camera on 100 dives, but it's certainly very important when you've only had the camera on a few dives and you're still getting used to it. You don't want to be fumbling around in the dark looking for the correct button or the correct lever. So we have that really, really well marked out.
Yeah, and then kind of going along with these controls, I'd say one of my favorite things is the grips on the housing itself. Now, I believe they're silicone grips. Is that correct?
Yes, they're a silicone compound, so they're real squeezy. They come out, they can be added to any of the CNC handles, whether you've got an old housing or not. They're a little pricey. I don't remember what the exact price per pair is on it, but they're well worth it. These are nice when you're barehanded or even when you're wearing a glove, because when you're barehanded, of course, you know, the texture on the grip is a little bit rough. So if you have softer hands, don't do a lot of yard work like I do, you're gonna really like these. And when you're diving with big, heavy gloves like we do in the cold water on the West Coast here, they actually squeeze down a little bit. So it gives you a better grip, a better purchase on the overall housing by having this little silicone pad in there. So they're a big deal.
Awesome.
I really like them.
Yeah.
And we have them in 2 colors, gray and yellow. If you see them coming in a stock housing anymore in the last year or so, yellow is all the mirrorless product. and the gray is the DSLR.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, it feels like you're not going to lose the housing when you're taking it through surf, and that's kind of a really nice feeling to have, especially today. So, Andy, I see that there is a nice large bulkhead on this housing right here. Can you tell me a little bit more about the M24 bulkhead on the housing?
Yeah, this large bulkhead over here was put in because the prevalence with this camera for the end user is not just to do stills, but to do video as well. And the camera's got great capability in 8K and also 4K 120. So in order to get the throughput for that, you need some pretty heavy duty HDMI cables, and they're large. So having this 24 millimeter port over here, we can remove this and use the hardware from a third party with their monitor and their cabling and plug it right into the camera. And now you've got a large monitor or monitor recorder, which is really the better of the two. And we have a big enough port on here so you can accommodate that. That's a big plus.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, you know, having an external monitor or recorder can do a few things. If you have a recorder, then often you can shoot at higher bit rates and have higher quality video overall. It reduces the overheating issue that you can run into with the R5 when you're shooting at higher frame rates like 4K at 120 frames a second or 8K because everything's being recorded onto the recorder, so the camera doesn't overheat as quickly. And then it also helps if you want to view your LUTs or if you want to view waveforms or zebra stripes or anything like that. If you're shooting video, I highly recommend an external monitor system, and with this housing you can definitely do that.
Like the Atomos Ninja 5, whatever the latest one, I don't remember. They keep changing them,
I think there's the Atomos Ninja 5
I think there's a 6 now or something.
Yeah.
Or S. I don't know, but those things are really cool. They're pretty big, so they've got a nice big screen so you can see really easily. You don't have to look through the viewfinder anymore. So a lot of pluses to that type of a system with the Canon R5.
And having that, and you also have that ball mount at the top, so you can just mount it right at the top and be able to see everything pretty easily. Yeah,
this ball mount, this is the CNC ball mount. Of course, you could have a ultralight or a different model of ball mount you could put up here as well. This is the one we use. You can tell by the yellow O-ring in it. But anything up there to mount the monitor onto or a light.
Yeah, and that's great for, you know, any lighting accessories, spotlights, video lights. Having one video light at the top can be nice when you're shooting video. It keeps things pretty simple. So.
Especially if you're doing close macro stuff where you don't need 2 huge lights way out far.
So, Andy, we know this housing is metal. Is there any feature on this housing that, you know, helps with some of the issues you run into putting metal in water?
Absolutely. First off, we use a marine grade aluminum that is coated, specially coated, and then hard anodized. We actually have a triple coating on all of our housings, but that's not enough. When you're dealing with dissimilar metals like the stainless steel next to the aluminum and in salt water, you have a real problem. And the stronger metal wins. That means the expensive part, the aluminum housing, loses, so it's losing electrons. On the bottom of the housing, we've got zinc sacrificial diodes down here, and you can see that they're probably getting a little bit corroded. I think I might have 100 dives or so on this housing right now. That's what we want. We want the zinc to give it up. That way the structure of the metal, the housing itself, isn't giving it up, or any of the other aluminum. The other thing that happens quite often if you've had an older aluminum housing, especially back when the days when everyone was making cast housings, they're all machined now, but when we were making cast housings, it was even worse. You get all this fuzzy white stuff around and you clean it off, and you're just literally wiping away aluminum dust at that point. So the housing slowly deteriorating. So by putting the sacrificial zinc diodes down at the bottom of it, we eliminate an awful lot of that. You still need to wash your housing, you still need to soak it, dry it and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't mean you can just forget it, but they're there, and that's a big plus.
Yeah, I would say. And how do you feel about like the overall weight of the housing?
The housing comes in right around 6 pounds. The overall weight and size dimensionally, it's a little smaller. I was shooting 5D Mark IVs for a long time. I still have one. And it's a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter than that. So, and I prefer that. That's, most people want smaller and lighter, except when there's a, 15-foot tiger shark coming in front of me. Then the bigger the camera, the better.
Yeah, definitely that. And, kind of going on with the size, I noticed that like the window for the LCD is pretty nice and big. One of the things that's really nice having a mirrorless camera like the R5 is that the autofocus speed is about the same through the viewfinder. Well, it is the same through the viewfinder and LCD. because you don't have that mirror flipping up anymore. So what that does is you can actually use the LCD to take all your photos if you need to. You don't necessarily need a magnified viewfinder, and there's a nice big window on this housing, so I really like that. But if you are kind of getting up there in age and your eyes might not be what they used to be,
you're starting to wear the readers. You want the viewfinder.
Yeah. So Andy had a 180-degree viewfinder from CNC today, which we can show. And I feel like this viewfinder is probably best for wide-angle photography in general, just because it's straight out, and so you'll want the camera kind of up at eye level or get down to the camera's level. I believe there's also a 45-degree viewfinder that you can use, and that'll allow you to put your head over the viewfinder a little better, and you can shoot macro a little better that way. So that's great if you just have trouble kind of seeing the screen, or if you want to get into weird angles. The 45-degree viewfinder is a good one for weird angles and getting under crevices and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the 180, just comes straight back here. One of the pluses of the 180, or any viewfinder for that matter, is something you probably haven't noticed. When you just have a normal viewfinder, it sticks out about to here. If you can get your mask up against it, that's where you want to be. So you want your mask right against the rubber on any viewfinder, whether it's an extended magnified viewfinder or just the regular viewfinder. But in order to do that without the extended viewfinder, you're literally having to turn your head because the regulator's sticking out. And if you have a rebreather, it's even worse, because now in all rebreathers there's a second stage bailout valve on the bottom of the mouthpiece. So this distance here keeps you from having to do that. So you can couple up directly. So you put the mask faceplate right up against the rubber here and have a nice straight on look instead of looking through the corner. So viewfinders are a big plus. I use the 180s for macro and everything, wide angle. The 45s are really good, especially if you've got something in an odd position, or if you are doing over-unders and you want to get up above the camera. And by the way, the 45-degree viewfinders do rotate. So if you want to turn the camera from a horizontal position into a vertical position to shoot vertical, the viewfinder does rotate. And I think most of the ones on the market, other manufacturers do the same thing. So just so you know, in case you're wondering about viewfinders.
Yeah. Great. So I think we've covered a lot of the accessory ports. If I forgot to mention that, does this housing, does it come with a vacuum system, or are there available vacuum systems?
It does. This one was a early model, and it's mine. I didn't have a vacuum system shipped on it. They didn't have it in stock at the time, and I wanted to get it and start getting it in the water. COVID has slowed so much of our progress down at this point. It's, as you know, it's affected basically everybody in every way, shape, and form in life, it seems like. So this one doesn't have it, but that would be right here. We use the Leak Sentinel VX5B, which is a short version of the old Leak Sentinel, which used to be long. So more of the guts, so to speak, are on the inside of the housing. And they work great. They're real simple to use. They've got a little bit of memory built into them. So you can pump them up and then shut it off, because that's all external. You just move a small cap, shut it off, and when you come out the next morning to do your dive, you take the cap off, turn it back on, and it has memory built in. So it'll tell you green, it's still got vacuum, or hey, red, overnight, something slipped out. The little ghosts in there opened up something or other. So you know right away. So you don't have to open your housing and flip switches and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so vacuum systems are really great to have just as a peace of mind. So before you get in the dive that your housing is good to go. So now with that, I think we've covered a lot of the button layout, accessory ports, and everything except our lighting system. So let's talk a little bit about that. So what kind of strobes do you have on here?
Well, these are the newer version of the YSD3. So this is really kind of a firmware upgraded YSD3 called the YSD3 2 or Mark II. And what we found was over the past year, a lot of manufacturers came out with a lot of different compact cameras, and they all have proprietary algorithms built into their flashes, which in many cases are used to drive through fiber optic cables the strobes. So we were having some incompatibility, especially with TTL. And a lot of people really like TTL, especially with the smaller cameras. They're probably newer divers, maybe not. Maybe they're just looking for a smaller setup. But at any rate, we wanted to upgrade the firmware, so we did that. And we also found that there was some complaints out of the industry amongst the other manufacturers where our strobes weren't being triggered properly using their TTL converters and their flash triggers. So we wanted to eliminate that as well. So we went through the strobe, did a firmware upgrade to it, took care of that. We also did one physical change, and that's to the power controller, the mode controller, and the power controller on the back. We made these knobs a little bit larger so that if you're like Nirupam and I and you're diving in cold water much of the year and you're wearing 5mm gloves or something like that, you can get a better purchase on these. The old YSD3 is still a wonderful strobe. I have a couple of those as well. And all the same performance, beam angle, recycle time, everything. I replaced my YS250s. They're completely retired at this point. I don't even bother to look at them anymore. It's kind of sad because they were really an epic strobe. But now I'm carrying around something much smaller underwater, so I'm faster underwater and save about 14 pounds in travel, basically, with the 5 strobes I carry, the batteries and everything. The housing comes with ports for fiber optic cables up on the front up here. The housing and the YSD3 strobes come with 2 different ways of triggering them. One, of course, is the fiber optics, and we've got 2 ports up here for fiber optic cables that can go right on into the strobe there, so you can drive them that way. Do remember, when you're shooting with an R5, there is no pop-up flash, so you have to add either a manual flash trigger, or you have to add one of our YS converter R's. And the new YS converter R allows us to do TTL or manual. We've got a really slick setup here with an external button, because sometimes TTL just doesn't work as well as you need it to. Some people say it's bad in wide angle, it's good in macro, and vice versa. All this kind of stuff. They're just different conditions. If you've got a lot of darkness in the picture and a highly reflective subject in the middle, and it's only occupying maybe 25% of the frame, what's going to probably happen is you're going to overexpose your subject, and vice versa. Let's say you've got a nice dark moray eel in around a bunch of bright coral heads. Well, the eel is going to underexpose, and the coral heads are going to really kind of control the TTL. So we want to be able to switch back and forth from TTL to manual real quickly. So all you have to do with this is push the button. And the system is not in here, and I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there's a ring light right here. And it shows in green when you're in manual, or in blue when you're in TTL. And this is also the off and on controller. So by simply holding it down for 3 seconds, it shuts the whole system off, saving the batteries in the TTL converter. Again, it's not one of those where you've got to go into the housing, turn it on, put the back on the housing. You can set everything up at night, take your time with coffee in the morning, know that your camera is probably going to be at least 99.9% assured that it's going to be ready in the morning between the vacuum and the TTL converter. So the TTL converter can drive us in TTL, automatic strobe exposure, or controlled strobe exposure is probably a better way to say that, or manual. Or you can get just the straight manual flash trigger itself. And I was talking about how some other manufacturers reported problems, or people reported problems with their flash triggers. One of the other reasons we updated the firmware in the YS-D3 Mark II was to take care of those situations. So I've gone and actually tested them on some third-party housings with both their manual flash trigger and their TTL converter, and the D3 Mark IIs work just fine. Now, if you just bought D3s a couple months ago, you're saying, oh gosh, I shouldn't have bought those. Not true. If you want to use TTL and you're not getting the TTL performance that you want out of the D3s, we can do a firmware upgrade here at Tusa in Long Beach. Just send your strobes in, we hook it up to a computer, we can do the upgrade right there for you. So it basically becomes the same strobe, it just doesn't have the bigger knobs.
Sweet. And I noticed that there are some attachments that you have onto the strobes. So today we were shooting macro with the Canon RF100. Can you tell us a little bit about these macro accessories?
Yeah, what we've got here are dedicated snoots. So over time, we've seen the marketplace really want something like this. And this particular product has a couple of unique features in it. One is it's a simple snoot to use. This is more of a benefit than a feature, but we've got a pretty wide snoot on here. A lot of snoots come down to a very narrow taper, and that makes them difficult to aim for most people. So we stayed with a 25 millimeter taper on the front of it. This is removable, and underneath this, I don't know if the camera will catch us or not, there's a diffuser in there. So we built a diffuser into our strobe. Very simple to do. We have a centered set of flash tubes on this, and we didn't want to go to a circular ring for various reasons. Mostly the real estate of a circular ring, even though they make a nice round beam, the real estate on the circular ring slows down the recycle time. We didn't want to lose that performance, so we used a little toroidal lens on the front of the flash tubes and the dual flash tubes. But because of that, we had to offset the modeling light or the targeting light. So because it was offset, we set this little prism up in here so that the modeling light or targeting light shoots right into this and then reflects out of this little mirror right down the very center of the beam. So for $80, there's quite a bit of engineering that's gone into this, and it's dedicated to the YSD2 strobe. And they work wonders for macro. If you want to get darker backgrounds, so many of the really coolest subjects are in the salad bowl, so to speak, and you light all that stuff up. You spend an awful lot of time in post Photoshop or Lightroom trying to get rid of that. So that's a big plus.
Yeah, and the beams, because they are a little bit wider, I feel like, you know, they're a little bit better for wide angle photography than other snoots as well. So wide angle snoot photography is not a very common thing to do, but it's definitely doable with these strobes and the snoot combination too.
Something I started to talk about, I don't know if we got through with that, but there are two ways to trigger. We have the regular old style Mykonos type sync cable for the YSD3, and we also have the fiber optic cables that we talked about. So, and when you buy a CNC housing, it comes all pre-wired for this. So all of this bulkhead and the little pigtail that goes down into the hot shoe, all of that is there. There's no extra $100, $150, $200 to set that up. The only thing you'd have to add is if you are going to run in fiber optic, you'd have to add either the flash trigger or the TTL converter. So it does come out of the box ready to run a sync cable if you need to do that, or if you want to do that.
Yeah, that's a really nice feature.
And options are good, right? You know, everybody wants
nice
it their own way.
options.
I prefer these for the most part, but
yeah,
if I want to run TTL, I've got to run the fiber optic cables.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. Sweet. So let's see. Oh yeah. So the whole purpose of our dive today was to test the Canon RF 100 and, you know, dive with the R5, which is a great camera. And we've talked about the R5 before. I'll put my reviews in the link below, like I said. But Andy, what were your thoughts about shooting the RF 100 so far?
I'm amazed. First off, the R5 camera has an amazing autofocus system. The animal eye focus is hit and miss depending on the subject and the background, but it works very well with some things. So I keep it programmed in and I can utilize it if I want. But the main lever, the back button focus is right here, and it says AF on right here, and that's the one you're on most of the time. It's real easy to reach that with your thumb, even if you have small hands. So the camera's autofocus is phenomenal. When I saw the RF 100 come out, what first of all really got my attention to that was the extended reproduction ratio. So the standard 100, the 60, they all do 1-to-1 reproduction, which is pretty good. And you get a little boost from the front. The RF 100 macro, it comes out of the box at 1.4-to-1 reproduction ratio.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
And that is the difference between full framing something this big and full framing something that big. So you almost don't need to put a diopter lens in the front.
Yeah.
Of course, if you do, you're getting even more magnification. So big plus. The lens also has a bokeh adjustment, so you can adjust for, I just call it maximum depth of field or minimum depth of field.
Right.
And the bokeh looks a different way. You really need to test that. That's not something we can control in the housing. So you have to find your sweet spot topside with some insects or frogs or something, and then take it underwater and see how you like it. But that control is there, so that's a big plus. So two big, huge reasons to purchase that lens. Now, the biggest one is the autofocus is incredible. Like the camera that's driving it, the autofocus is fast and super accurate. This camera by itself, without the RF 100, increased my keepers that based on focus, which is usually the biggest problem with the other cameras that I run, by 30 or 40%. And with this lens, it's just everything. It's just tack sharp. You put it on something and you've got to be ready to just pull the trigger right now. You literally, if you're running like ISO 400 at macro, you can turn the strobes down to power setting at about F11, which is about quarter power. And you can just pull the trigger and shoot multiple flashes, just boom, 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 and every exposure will be on without TTL. That's even manual. And because the focus is so accurate, you can just literally hold the autofocus lever down and it just stays right on target. So I'm keeping 80 to 90% of my images now, where before I was lucky to keep 50%. So I was losing 50% of my images based on focus issues. And that's understandable in autofocus camera. This camera with this lens, it's a must-have. If you buy this camera and you do like to shoot macro with a 100mm lens, this is the one, because it has the additional magnification. You're able to shoot it up really close too, and that's a big plus in our waters here in California, especially on a day like today, where we've got chest and head high surf, because the surge is moving you around quite a bit. So the closer you can get, the more braced position you can get into.
Yeah, I'm super excited to try this lens. I haven't tried it yet, but I've got one waiting in my car, so I'm going to be diving with that lens pretty soon. But even shooting the normal EF 100mm macro, this camera is really fast. So I can't wait to get in with a new one. And it is, in a way, a super macro lens. So I'm excited to see what 1.4 versus 1 really looks like. But I have high hopes for the lens and the spherical aberration control. So that's the bokeh control. Seems interesting. I'm not sure if I'd want to move it from 0 personally when I've tried it at the top side, but everybody has their own preferences for bokeh, and I'm kind of more of a straight like contrast photo shooter with black backgrounds and stuff like that. So if you're into shallow depth of field, it's a really interesting lens for sure. All right, Andy, I think that is our overview of the Canon R5 in the CNC R5 housing. I'm Nirupam with Bluewater Photo. If you guys have any questions at all, make sure you drop them in the comments below, or email us at sales@bluewaterphotostore.com. We can get you a quote on the full system for whatever you need, any lenses that you need. We'll find you the right ports and work with you on the housing choices and everything like that. So if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. Yeah, thank you for your time, Andy.
You're welcome, man. Pleasure diving with you.
Yeah,
sorry
it's been
we had
great diving
such
with you.
kind of crappy conditions, but
Yeah,
next time.
Yeah, next time for sure. All right.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching.